Welcome to The Top Out, the show where we talk with entrepreneurs and investors about how they got started, the companies they run, and how they see the future. Brought to you by Redpoint Solutions. All right, Ed, thanks for jumping on with me. I appreciate it.
Hey, excited to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm wondering if you could actually just walk us through a little bit of your background and a little bit of your career and kind of what led you into the type of consulting you do around customer experience.
Sure. Well, I've been around a long time, got a lot of gray hair. I started out my career at HP. I was there for about 12 years. I was in sales and I got into marketing and operations and left in 99 to start my first company, a software company, and then went and did a series of other things, did 4 startups actually in my career. And my last one, I was in the hospitality industry in 2008. And we all know what happened about that period of time. It's like, what's the next thing for me? And then I started looking back at technology where I started and said, you know what, there's a lot of lessons there. There's a lot of cool things that we can do. And that's when customer success was starting to really take off. And that's where I wound up where I am. And I've been doing that for about the last 9 or 10 years.
Yeah, that's super interesting. How do you feel about the difference between running a company or just operating as a CX leader inside of a company versus doing consulting? I know there's pros and cons to each of them, but what's kind of like your current thinking about it in terms of actually making an impact in the work you're doing, but also just in terms of your lifestyle and happiness and, experience working every day?
Well, I've gone on both sides of this because I like doing both, and both have advantages and disadvantages, right? So in being an operator, you can roll up your sleeves, and as an entrepreneur, and you run a small company too, is that it's fun because you can actually see an impact that you're making, and you're running the show, right? And you're making the decisions, and that's fun being an operator. On the other hand, if you're in consulting, you see a lot of variety, right? One of the things I learned at HP was in sales was you walked in all these different environments, you saw all these cool new things, and you don't get that if you're just focused on your own entity. You get to see good variety, but then the flip side of consulting is, it's all over the map in terms of projects and income, so it's kind of hard to manage that. And one of the frustrations is a lot of clients don't execute. You go through this whole process and you set all these things up, you give some great recommendations, and nothing happens. And that frustrates me as an operator. It's like, turn the crank, get some things going. So, but everything is different. You take it the way it is, and you make the best of it. And either way works really well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to dig into some of the specific work that you do around retention and specifically around this idea of time to value. So I'm wondering if you could actually just define that term for us. So what does time to value mean, and why is it important?
Yeah, well, all of us, when we buy something, we have an expectation of some payoff. We're trying to solve a problem. We select among our options, and we have expectations about what we're going to get from that decision, right? So the time to value is the time generally between the time when people place the order and the time that they see they have some experience of value, right? And it may not be the full ROI, value for the whole investment, but even right away, when you start to buy something, you start to have experiences. You start to interact with the people and the product. Maybe you're setting things up. Maybe you're going through project management. But all along the way, you're starting to get a sense about, are we heading the right direction? Is this the value that I expected? And you start to make those determinations or those evaluations. And so time to value, like for a user of new software, they're going to see right away, especially if they're just trying it out. Wow, this is a whole lot simpler than I thought. Doing it the old manual way, it's a lot faster now. So they may have that experience first. A mid-level manager would start to see that value, that time to value, when they see a number of their people starting to use that software. And then maybe they start to see some productivity gains and people free up some time to do other things. So they start to experience that. And then the executive, the economic buyer who's plunking down the money saying, we're trying to make some fundamental changes in our business. they're going to start to see the economics of that, right? So we can delay some hires, we can grow more scalably. That's a longer term proposition. So in a business to business environment, you may have those little time to value moments happening at different times with different audiences.
I'm really glad you said the word or used the word expectations. I find when I have a bad experience with a company, it's usually around misaligned expectations, meaning I don't think that it's fundamentally better necessarily to have a 1-day onboarding process versus a 1-week onboarding process, right? But if I'm expecting it to take 1 day and then it ends up taking 1 week, I'm probably not going to be really happy. So how do you guys think about expectation setting when you're thinking about like onboarding or just, customer journey in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the thing about value is that value is subjective and it is relative, right? So it's how we individually determine what value is to us. And it's also relative. So if, for example, you had a great point, is that if you have gone through some software startups and some new software deployments, and they're fairly simple, you kind of know what to expect, right? Because you've had that experience a few times. And then you kind of start to measure everything by what you already know, what you've experienced. So your expectations are really set relative to what you have experienced before. And if you haven't had that, if it's a truly novel experience, you don't know what to expect, right? So then you have to start pulling information, and we do this all automatically, subconsciously. Anytime we make a decision, all of our decisions have some expectation implied in them, whether we articulate that, whether we're aware of it or not. But our brains have to set an expectation, because once we make that decision, we right away start looking for what is the payoff and is this what I expected? So the brain automatically will set an expectation one way or the other, either from past experience or by collecting information. What does the salesperson say? What did I read online? What do the reviews say? And so forth. But every single time people buy something, there's always an expectation.
Yeah. If we're thinking about early stage startups, when do you think is the right time in the life of the startup to start measuring time to value, and how do you start measuring it? And I know it probably gets really complicated when you're talking about different cohorts and maybe end users versus executive stakeholders, but in the simplest way, how do you start measuring it, and when's the right time to? And I have a hunch that most companies are just not measuring it at all.
Yeah, and that hunch would be right. I think that, when you think about it, you mentioned early stage. Most times when people are early stage, they are still trying to figure out, do I have traction here? Do I have a product that's going to have a ramp to it? Is there a market for what I'm selling, right? And a lot of times what early stage companies do is they focus on the product. What does this thing do and how do you operate it, right? Very, very few startups look at this from what is the product here? Is the product the software? Is it the hardware? It's actually all of it. It's the experience too, right? So very few companies actually look holistically at the customer experience alongside what the product itself does. But product people are the best people to go out and actually ask about, what are your expectations for time to value? Let's say you bought this today. When do you expect to have this result, whatever we're selling? What would make sense to you? And based upon your experience or what you're hearing about our solution, when would you expect to see that, right? So it's best to have the customer tell you what those expectations are. And even if you're an early stage startup, you talk to 10 people, you can probably get in the ballpark, right? And why not make that a KPI? You hand over, we got our product, but now our customer success team, or however we're doing our onboarding, if that's completely at scale and automated, now you got something to work with. You've talked to enough people. Let's set a KPI for that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I see a lot of software and consulting firms and just attention in general focused on growth, and not as much attention focused on retention and churn. Do you think that retention gets neglected, and that people are too focused on growth? Does it even make sense separating retention from growth? I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it is overlooked a lot of times, but I think a lot of savvy investors, a lot of venture capital firms and even private equity firms do look at churn. I mean, what really got this whole industry going in customer success was big, venture capital firms looking at that and saying, well, your churn's too high. You don't have product market fit here. Why are you losing customers, right? So early stage investors certainly have gotten smarter about that. Investors have gotten smarter about it. And I don't know who originally said this, but I heard it again the other day, that the best way to make money is to stop losing money, right?
Yeah.
And this is losing money. Why are you're spending a lot of money in marketing, a lot of money on sales. You've got people, a lot of people, expensive people spending a lot of time acquiring new customers.
Mm-hmm.
So you make this big upfront investment in customer acquisition, and then they dribble out the door, right? Did you even get your payback from the investment you make to acquire that customer? And shockingly, in the software world anyway, that's like averaging about 18 months or longer. So you have to hang on to these customers just to pay back what it cost you to go acquire them. So when you start doing that math, it's surprising, but most people don't stop to think about that. That's losing a lot of money unless you can hang on to your customers.
Yeah, I think there's an idea, this sort of if you build it, they will come idea that's incredibly product centric. So
Mm-hmm.
you build the right product and growth will just happen. And then I think startups usually go through some sort of phase where they start to realize we actually have to get really smart about growth. We have to build a sales team. But then they don't then take that same logic and apply it to churn. It's the same idea, like that if you build the right product, it'll just be sticky naturally. And when you have product market fit, that's true a little bit, but you still need to put, I think, the same amount of attention into, retaining customers and customer experience in general. And it's just a little bit short-sighted to put all of this investment into growth on the front end of it, but then not think about, churn and sort of stickiness on the back end.
That's exactly right. And you can have a really sticky product, and that's great. But we have to stop and think about, well, how are customers doing this now, right? Whatever your solution is, you're introducing a better way of doing things. That's what they're buying, right? But they have to change from what they were doing
Yeah.
to your new solution, and change is hard, right? So part of that role in customer success is to help people along that path. And that doesn't, a lot of times does not come from the product. That is a process that you need to manage, especially in large entrenched organizations with lots and lots of users. It's even more important.
Do you think that there are any lessons that SaaS companies can learn from service-based companies? And I run a consulting company. Most of our customers are venture-backed technology companies, and so we sort of live at this interesting intersection of that. For us, customer experience is everything. It's our biggest marketing channel. It's our retention channel. It's our growth. It's sort of everything. But working with both types of firms, I mean, do you see lessons that they can learn from each other, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people in services business, their heads wrap around solutions far more than products, right? So I was employed by a managed service provider and work with a lot of service providers, and they don't necessarily, they look at technology and products differently than product providers, right? So if you're a software provider, your baby is your product, and that's your thing. And that's how you define solution. But if you're on the services side, you look a little bit more holistically at this, and you look at, well, what's a customer trying to solve here? And yeah, there's a lot of ways we could do that. We could cobble together, multiple different technologies. They're more alike than they are different, sad to say, for most producers. There's a lot of similarities. So what the customer is trying to do is usually a mashup. How do we blend these things together? How do we integrate it? So what customers are really doing, whether you're a service provider or you're a product provider, is they have to build solutions. They're trying to solve a problem, and it's more than just a single product. So I think service providers are much more sensitized to that. Even when I was in a company called IntelliSecure, they were acquired by Proofpoint a little while ago, but they were very proud of the fact that they were vendor agnostic, and that's why customers work with them, is that they wouldn't come in there with an agenda. Let's start with your problem. there's a lot of ways to solve it, and then let's turn around and see what the best products are that we can blend together into a solution and solve your problem.
Yeah, I think we take an even broader perspective on that, where a lot of folks come to us looking for just sort of uh, general advice about technology or about kind of CRM specifically. And I would say maybe about half of the time, I'm actually steering people away from the platform that my company specializes in. And I'm doing that because one, I think it's the right thing for their business. And I sort of just, believe in being honest and transparent. But those people that you then help make the right decision, they turn around and refer you to their friends or their peers at another company. And so I don't know. I do think it's interesting to think about things from a solutions perspective, and there's not like a one size fits all, or trying to steer people towards a particular outcome that is good for you in the short term.
Right. And that's a really good point. When I was at HP many years ago, I sold, 8,000 different products, the old HP catalog, and had geographic territory. And what you just said is something I did on occasion because, you look at a problem, you say, I don't really have a good fit for you. Here's my contact for my competitor. Why don't you call them, because they have a better solution for you? And when you do that, even though it's the short term, you're trading the short term off, the long term is there. Customers will come back and say, I trust you because you gave me good direction. Even when it didn't benefit you personally, they will always call you back first.
Yeah. All right. So I want to switch gears a little bit here and ask you a couple of questions. Mm-hmm. They don't have to be rapid fire, but some slightly shorter questions. So what's one thing that drives you crazy as a consumer when it comes to customer experience?
As a consumer, I think it's probably what a lot of people face when you have a problem and they make it impossible for you to connect with somebody, right? It's okay. Everybody uses bots and things like that and goes to the help center. But if they bury that and there's just no way to get to a human when you need that interaction, when it's a corner case, that drives me nuts. And I think that's probably true of your listeners too.
Yeah. Any companies you want to call out on here?
I'm trying to think lately where I've had that experience. I think probably with my cable provider. I think that was a time when it was like, how do I even get a hold of them?
Yeah.
Because we had an outage or something like that. And it was like, okay, I don't see it on my app. I don't see it online. Okay, I think this is an outage. And you had to really dig to try to find where those numbers were.
Yeah, that's a classic. We won't call out any software companies.
Yeah.
What's the best turnaround story you've seen or that you've worked on related to customer experience?
Turnaround. Well, one where we made a very dramatic shift in time to value was when I was with IntelliSecure and managed service provider, professional services in the data protection space, and they're now part of Proofpoint. And the old model when I joined was very much, hey, let's start with a blank piece of paper and let's talk about your business goals and objectives, right? And then when they took clients through a process of defining what their security strategy is, and then they would, define, okay, how are we going to do this? Let's look at your architecture and your data and where everything resides, and now let's go find the best solution providers for that. And let's do all the implementation, configuration, set up all the policies, blah, 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 blah. A year and a half goes by and customers are like, we've been dumping all this money on you and it's been a year and a half and I have no data protection. Why have I been paying you this whole time, right? So real legitimate complaints from customers is that, the IntelliSecure was forcing their customers to go through their process. And customers are like, I'm unprotected this whole time. So one of the biggest shifts that we did very early on, and to the credit of the CEO there and the senior executive team, I came in and what we did is we basically redesigned that whole approach, where rather than this kind of a waterfall approach where you start literally with a blank piece of paper and then on the other end you spit out a fully operating data protection program, is they said, well, let's think about this from an agile perspective. How can we stand something up quickly on something that we know that you need because everybody needs it, like personal PII, right? That personally
Yep.
identifiable information. How do we stand up a server with a policy and get you some protection right now? What does that look like? And how can we turn the crank? And rather than this very elongated process, literally we would stand up a brand new policy in the infrastructure, and customers are like, wow, that's cool. That's one policy. We have all these others. Great. Well, let's go to the next one, right? So now, IntelliSecure was no longer in the critical path of this whole thing. We were now going like this, we're ready. You guys ready? And now the customer was in the critical path. So it flipped the entire thing around. And that was probably the most exciting thing, is that, very, very quickly you could stand it up, demonstrate that quick time to value. And now it becomes a pull as opposed to a push, right? They want more, and they keep pulling for more, and they can't move fast enough, right? So that was a total shift in getting them to data protection much faster.
Yeah, that's a great example. Okay, what are some brands that you think are killing it right now in terms of customer experience? Anything you've purchased or experienced recently that comes to mind?
Funny thing, they've had their trouble recently, but in the past, and they were one of these rocket ships, was Peloton, right? So I bought a Peloton. My wife and I did a couple of years ago. When the pandemic was going strong, and that's, I think, when Peloton was going like this too, right? So people wouldn't go into health clubs anymore. So. But I thought they did a brilliant job of how they did the whole experience and the whole process. Because think about all the exercise equipment manufacturers that, made their stuff that are still coat racks, right? I mean, they really changed that model, and they did some really smart things from a behavioral science perspective, how their instructors, you kind of attach to them, how they use leaderboards and all these other social tricks and tools to really make that product sticky, to get you into a habit, the email communication, the hitting the milestones, on and on and on. They really lined up a whole bunch of really smart ways of doing this, even from the time when people, delivered the product. Guys came in, they took it down in the basement, and in 5 minutes, we connected it to the Wi-Fi, and they did a little orientation, and they were out the door. In 5 minutes, we were set up and going. And it was like, wow, they really thought this thing through. These guys were just banging it out. I mean, it's just brilliant work around there. And they've done a lot of work. There was a webinar a little while ago, and they talked to one of their top analytics guys. And they walked through all the things that they were learning by watching the behaviors of their customers out there and how they were introducing new products and services and what they had learned. And it was just off the hook, cool stuff that they were doing.
Yeah, totally. There's, it's interesting that Peloton sort of blurred the lines, where you could argue Peloton is sort of an entertainment company first, a fitness company second, and maybe a social media or social network company third. And so if you're an entertainment company first or even second, like, the whole thing has to be theatrical, right? So the box showing up, the unboxing experience, setting it up for the first time, you want to pay attention to those details, because people are obviously getting on the bike to exercise, but people are also spending time on there for the instructors, for the content, for all those different things.
Exactly. Yep.
That makes a lot of sense. My example is Loom. I'm just in love with Loom. It's my favorite app. And it's not as exciting as Peloton, but I just love it.
I got to try that. I've heard about them.
Loom's really incredible. I have this theory that, Loom has the potential to maybe decrease just the number of meetings that occur in the world by 10 to 50%. I think the old way of thinking about it was could this meeting be an email? And if so, let's just send an email. Now it's could this meeting be an email? If no, could this meeting be a Loom video? If no, then let's set up a meeting. But anytime somebody sends me a Loom video of them just recorded talking through something, 2 or 3 minutes can replace an entire 20 to 30 minute meeting, which is super valuable.
Very handy. Yep.
So Ed, my last question for you is, how will customer experience look different in 5 to 10 years from from a consumer experience, from kind of the, the operational side of things at the business. But what do you think is going to be different over the next 5 to 10 years?
That's a great question. I think, there's obviously a lot of stuff going on with predictive analytics and, customer intelligence kinds of stuff that's happening, and rapid learning about patterns and behaviors and things like that. I think that's only going to accelerate. And that will, you're going to see a lot more bots. You're going to see a lot more really intriguing things, creative things, using the technology in some new ways to kind of very quickly detect where people are and what they need in that moment, right? So I think that's going to be real interesting to watch, is recognizing patterns of behavior or challenges and then popping up, here's what you need, or here's a solution to what you're doing. I think that's going to be really cool. I also think that there is a shift, that people are gradually starting to learn this notion that you have to design the experience at the same time that you're designing the product. This is a radical kind of new way of thinking about product management. And, that again, you look at what that whole product is. In fact, many, many years ago at HP, they defined something called the whole product, and it was the whole experience, looking at, buying a LaserJet printer. What does that look like? And what is that life cycle? And not just what is this product and physically what does it look like and what's the hardware and software and all those other things, but okay, a customer is going to buy this and they're going to buy ink, and then it's going to live some life and they're going to get support, and then they have to dispose of that product at the end of life. Well, where does that go? Does that go in a landfill? So when you start thinking about that whole life cycle, that whole experience of the product and how the customer interacts with that, and you design that into the product like Peloton did, I think that people are starting to understand that. When you talk about customer success at scale or customer experience, it all starts in design, and it all starts with understanding your customers. Back to our original conversation, what do they expect? It's not just about the product, but what do they expect when they first start learning it, interacting with it, using it, getting its support for it? Everything's based upon what they've already experienced and what they expect from it.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I think design's going to become much more important. I think D2C brands are doing a good job of this right now. I think, I just ordered this product called Mud Water, which is a coffee alternative. And just the box is beautiful. The unboxing experience is nice. Just everything about it just feels really nice. And when the experience of your product is taking place in somebody's home and you don't really have control over it the way you do with software, you have to be more thoughtful about that. Yeah. And so I could see, software companies or other types of companies maybe taking some lessons from some of those brands.
Yeah. And when you're doing everything at scale, it becomes even more critical, right? I mean, you just can't throw bodies at it. You have to, it all starts with how you define it and how you build it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, Ed, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. It's a great conversation. I'm sure I'll talk to you soon. And anything you want to plug, or any parting messages?
Anything I want to plug? Well, if anybody has any needs for customer success, operations improvement, reducing churn, accelerating time to value, I'm the guy to call.
Awesome. Thanks, Ed. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, Dana.
Cool. Thank you so much for watching this episode of The Top Out. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see the next episode, please follow our page on LinkedIn or subscribe to our YouTube. We'll see you next time.